with your background being pretty neutral as it relates to any government employment bias or, oh, I worked with that fucking agency and they're a bunch of clowns or whatever. I do think that you have a pretty unique perspective on all the different topics that you've covered over the years and different experts that you've had on. So I've got kind of a short list of just things that I'd like to get your opinion on, given that well-rounded view. Do you think that we'll ever see full transparency about Epstein's client list, or do you think that it's the ultimate political grenade that nobody wants to actually pull the pin on?
Absolutely not. We will never see it. It's also surreal. I'm sitting across from the guy who invented Epstein didn't kill himself.
To be fair, I don't look at it that way. I know it says that.
What do you mean you don't look at it that way? It's on tape.
No, but I'm not the first guy to have ever said that. I mean, there were people that maybe not were making a joke of it in that fashion or whatever to throw it in, somewhere. But like that kind of viewpoint and skepticism of him not actually killing himself, wasn't my idea.
Yeah.
But you don't think we'll ever see the list?
No.
Yeah. Why is that?
Long before this became a story again, with some news on it this year, I had multiple different people off camera who don't know each other and come from totally different backgrounds tell me off the record, so I'm not going to say exactly what they said, but tell me we will never see those files, and here's why. All the same reason, resolutely, look at me in the eye. And so nothing has surprised me this year. I think all your favorite people have different degrees of guilt. Does that mean everyone involved with the guy was a pedo? Absolutely not. It does not. Jeffrey Epstein was a sick fuck. You have to look objectively as to how something like this happened when you're someone that sick, though, and you have to realize he, for a long time, was an effective spy. And one of the reasons he was an effective spy is because he knew all he had to do was get around you, take some pictures, shake some hands, exchange some phone calls on the record, send some emails, and you were dirty forever because he knew how dirty he was. The reality is he was clearly an intelligence operation. It was clearly not ours, and people can do the math on that one. But I think the truth that is really hard for a lot of us, including myself, to swallow is that this kind of thing is something that happens around the world, and many intelligence agencies, including our own, get involved in stuff like this sometimes. And I'm talking about the worst things in the worst ways that you don't talk about at dinner parties. And I'm really glad I'm not back in those seats making those decisions, because I would not be able to make those decisions. I mean, my decision would be the opposite. And maybe that would, by the way, be the right decision, not for nothing. But, it really makes me sick. And some of the people I've talked to have put it in a really blunt way, and it's hard to disagree with them. And they're like, the world is just run by underground operations that espionage agencies around the world run on each other, and everything that happens up above ground is just collateral damage. And maybe that's oversimplified. I think some of that's oversimplified, but it's hard to disagree with that.
Well,
sometimes.
So what's the dot connecting with why it's not being released from those anonymous sources?
Because Epstein, I was going to use the word touched. That wouldn't be good. Epstein had access to everyone across culture, from the Oval Office on down to the businesses and everything in between. And so people are like, well, a lot of these people are dead. No, a lot of these people are not dead. This is not that long ago. He was still doing this after he left jail or prison. What his little fucking office that he got to set up there in that sweetheart deal and leave every day to go work at his office in downtown West Palm Beach. It's like, there's a quote that his brother said. His brother's a very suspicious character, to say the least. His brother said he was talking to Epstein about the 2016 election and the build up to it, and Epstein said to him, if anyone knew what I knew about these people, they'd cancel the whole election. And I believe that. I really do. And
so it's as simple as it's an all or nothing thing. If you release, hey, this politician on this side, like there's too many from both sides or every entity to where it's like there's this almost, I don't want to say gentleman's agreement because they're not fucking gentlemen, but it's hey, if this name gets released, they're all getting fucking released. Yep. So if you don't want this guy to be fucking on the chopping block, then don't do it, or your guy's going to be on it.
Mike, here's how I'd put it. It's how things look. And this is the most controversial subject matter possible in society on how things look, which is whether or not someone is a pedo. You know who Josh Giddey is? Josh Giddey is an NBA player for the Chicago Bulls now. When he was on the Oklahoma City Thunder a couple years ago, it came out that he had slept with, at the time, a 15-year-old girl. So when I tell you that, you go, oh, he's a pedophile, right? What if I told you that he met that girl at a club where she was let into the club? And by the way, we've seen pictures of her when she was 15. She did not look 15. And she aggressively came after him and took him home under the illusion that she was 21 years old. Now look at that and ask yourself, intentionally, is the guy a pedophile? Absolutely not, he's not. Now, you could argue about him needing to be more careful with stuff, but then he's 20 years old at the time. You put yourself in your 20-year-old shoes or whatever. Some hot girl at the club's coming up to you, you're an NBA player, she's, actually a girl, not a woman. You think she's a woman. And, you have some drinks at a place that adults go to, and you take her home, and you have no idea about it until 2 years later it comes out with a Snapchat.
Yeah,
Josh,
I mean, the fact that, there's a certain guard let down in that scenario, and that if you're in an establishment that you have to be 21 to get into, it's like there's going to be a natural assumption that anybody who's in there is at least fucking 21.
That's right. This is my point, though. Josh Giddey was called everything under the sun despite us knowing that information. People called him a pedo, people called him a kid fucker, all these different things. It's going to follow him around forever, despite the fact that I believe the guy didn't do anything wrong. I say that because including murder, like murder and pedophilia are like the two lowest things you can do in society. And there's something like sometimes more sinister about pedophilia than murder. And it's something that we have a 0 or 100 viewpoint on. And most of the time, I agree it's a 0 or 100 viewpoint view, and that's how it should be. But now think about this context, knowing how society looks at this. If you are a powerful figure, you run in powerful circles around hot women, and you go on this guy Jeff's flight, and there's a room in the back where you can fuck, and unbeknownst to you, everything down to the pen that's sitting on the counter in that room has a camera in it. And you go back there with 3 girls who say they're flight attendants. 2 of them are 25. The third one looks like she's their third twin sister, or triplet sister, but she's 16. And you have sex with all 3 of them on camera. And after the sex is done, the 16-year-old shows her driver's license, or she doesn't even have a driver's license, shows her ID on the camera, or it's proven in some way on that camera that she was a kid. And then the intelligence agency that collects that comes back to you and says, hey, pal, we got you. The context now doesn't matter. To society, you can explain, oh my God, no, these were 3 25-year-old flight. Nope. You fucked a kid. And I have a strong feeling that most of the people on Epstein's list were actually that and were not pedos. And then, yeah, there are definitely some people who were probably pedos. Your guess is as good as mine who most of those people were. But there is such a stigma with sex, and particularly sexual crimes related to any child, someone who's underage, that society has, that once you're even in that air, they got you, bitch. And that is how I've thought about, I've looked at this case for so long, like many people out there listening have. And I've never thought we're going to see all of it, because he got around everyone and he was a schmoozer. You know, he wasn't this rocket scientist or anything like that. He tried to pretend he was to some people, but he was smart and he knew how to just get access to you. And you got to remember, Ghislaine is the son of a sociopath, you know, Robert Maxwell, who also was one of the most effective spies to ever live. Do you know how unbelievable it is? That guy was born on a kibbutz in the middle of, I forget, like Czechoslovakia. I don't even remember what country, somewhere in Europe. Escapes Europe when the Nazis are taken over at age 17. He's never spoken a lick of English. Within 5 years, not only, he goes to Britain, not only is he fluent in English, he speaks the king's. Meaning he's got literally like the royal family's accent, one of the most strange accents in the world. So there's no like Czech or Yiddish in his background. Like, he speaks like a royal. And then he spied for multiple agencies, including Mossad, for the rest of his life. And there's a lot about him that makes it clear he was a monster outside of his job, to say nothing of his job. But, you know, his daughter, that was the apple of his eye. And she was very adept at getting into circles and saying the right things and getting people to like her. And she was the yin to Jeffrey's yang. And I just think they know way too much. Jeffrey knew way too much. And I mean, have you looked through the Black Book online? Mm-mm. Looked through that motherfucker so many times, man. Page 30, you got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. All right. Now, in my parents', and by the way, I like a lot of things RFK is doing right now, and I don't think RFK is a pedo, to be clear. But I went into my mom's office a few years ago, and at the bottom of one of the drawers is the old address book from when I was 5 years old, before we had phones, right? And you used to write in these things, someone's name, their address, their email if they had one, their home phone number, and their cell phone number. And I had all four grandparents alive when this address book was written. And across my grandparents, all four of them, I think we had 4 emails, 4 cell phones, 2 home phones, and 3 addresses. So it was like 13 or 14 contacts across 4 people, the 4 closest people in my life to my parents. Their literal parents, right? Robert F. Kennedy has like 12 or 13 contacts in there. Addresses, emails, phone numbers. He has his wife at the time, she's deceased now, he has his wife's maid of honor's contact in there. I don't even know what that means. And the maid of honor happened to be Andrew Cuomo's wife. When I see stuff like that, you can't look at that and say there's not some sort of there. Again, that doesn't mean that he was a pedo or anything like that. But what compromising information that was manipulated even is there on a guy like that? And it's not just to pick on Robert F. Kennedy. I could go across the board with people up to the guy sitting in the Oval Office right now. You know, how many times did Epstein visit Clinton's Oval Office? 18 times that we know about. You know, Clinton went on the Lolita Express 27 times that we know about. I think that's actually accurate because you have to write down the flight manifest. But maybe they hit him a few times. I don't know. Your guess, I don't know how this works. I don't get on private jets. I'm scarred for life on private jets. I'm cool waiting for 2 hours in commercial because I don't know whose fucking jet I'm getting on. It's never been an option for me, to be clear. But when it becomes one, I'm very, very against that stuff just because you don't know. But it is so widespread that we talked about ancient Rome earlier and civilization falling in on itself. You have had a wealth gap form like a fucking V since the 1980s between the dwindling sized elites that get bigger and richer but smaller in size and the rest of America where the middle class has been legislated away. They've been sold a college lie. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. Inflation has taken away all their wealth. Their 401ks aren't even real anymore. Social Security is going to be something that it doesn't actually pay off for them, and they've had to pay into it the whole way. And they're getting larger and larger as a mass, while the upper people get smaller and smaller and more separated and away. I mean, I saw they're opening up a $36,000 a year initiation fee grocery store in New York City right now. Are you fucking kidding me? If you ever see me in a place like that, shoot me. You know, it's like society's angry. And when you give them the ultimate dog bone to chew on, like an Epstein thing, if you give them that whole bone, they're going to swallow it and choke on it. And we're never going to see it because of that. There's too many bodies that are buried. That's just my opinion.
No, I appreciate it. It's obviously well thought out and heavily researched. So just so that I understand correct, you are 100% confident that Epstein was a state-sponsored spy for some other country than the United States?
Most likely Israel, yes.
But you're 100% convinced that's the case?
I have to be fair and say 99%. But if I were speaking offhand, I'd say 100%. I'm a YouTuber, so you got to have some self-awareness here.
Wealth-wise, is it easy to connect those dots and say then that his billions or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in wealth came from that government and not from his business and investment savviness here in the United States?
So I've said this a couple times now, and I'd love for someone more capable than me to really pull on this thread. But I think about this one keeps me up at night. Tara Palmieri, who at the time was a reporter for Politico. She's now on her own on YouTube, but she's been, she worked at Politico, she worked at Puck News, she's been a White House correspondent. She did 2 series podcasts back in maybe 2019, 2020. One was basically called Epstein, the other one was basically called The Maxwells. And the only shame of it is that it wasn't on camera, because they were both 8-part documentaries. She's going around with a microphone to the places, interviewing people, talking to victims, talking to lawyers, talking to people involved. The most insanely well executed, in my opinion, investigation of these situations ever done. And so I believe it was in the Maxwell's one. Maybe I'm misremembering that, and it was the Epstein one. Sorry. No, you know what? It was Epstein. Yeah. So she went around. Virginia Roberts Giuffre was a friend of hers who just passed away. Which, by the way, if we're going to be conspiratorial about all this stuff, we do have to be fair about this. Something that Tara reported after Virginia's death that did not get attention that should have. I'm not saying that this makes it 100%, but it's only fair we say this. When Virginia died of suicide, everyone said, oh, no, they killed another one. Virginia's family then chose to release pictures of her towards the end of her life that included her with the shit kicked out of her. And so Tara, she was now deceased, came out and said something to the effect of, I was told this off the record and kept it to myself because Virginia was not just a source, but she was a friend. But she confided in me about her husband beating the shit out of her and being in an abusive relationship. And so that was happening all over the place, and that may very well have contributed to what happened to her here, which we do have to say that. I'm not saying that doesn't mean someone didn't kill her, because it would have been convenient to do so, but I do have to at least say that fairly. Anyway, she took Virginia around in this documentary, podcast, and they would go knock on, find people in Virginia that she would run into from her time with Epstein, and she'd say, hey, it's Virginia, remember me? And see if they could get him to talk. Adam Perry Lang, the famous chef, was one of them who was like, oh my God, I remember you, through him an intermediary, and then wouldn't meet with them, which was interesting. But they went to, I believe his name was Juan Alessi, the house manager for Epstein. They went to his place. And he lived in a gated community now. And he said, oh my God, yes, come in. They go into the guy's kitchen, and he agrees to let them interview him and record him, which credit to him for doing that. And it's one of the things that's so painful to listen to, because you can hear, like when someone's stuck in a situation that's good for them, and then they just don't see things because of that, but they still see the things and they put it away subconsciously, and then later they have guilt for it because they're like, fuck, did I see that? I did see that. That's him. And so he was getting emotional talking about this, and you want to feel bad for him, but you're also like, how the fuck could you not have said something, my friend, But one of the things that he talked about that I felt was very revelatory, if that's even a word, was he said, I worked with Jeffrey in the 1980s, and he was well off. He lived in a nice place in the Upper East Side, but, nothing crazy. And then something happened in 1992, and he got the apartment, the famous one on East 71st Street. He got the plane. He started the plans to build in West Palm Beach. He had people in all the time. He got crazy, crazy wealth. And this is when he started to be known as someone worth $450 million. Hard to say. And I say this was very interesting to me because Robert Maxwell died. He did die, but, under suspicious circumstances in November 1991. He was buried on the Mount of Olives in Israel 5 days later, which is where they buried the highest level rabbis and state dignitaries. It was attended by multiple high-level people in the Israeli government. He clearly had worked for Mossad. And Robert Maxwell, say what you want about him, ran the Daily Mail and other businesses and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and was a massive narcissist and was probably killed out on that boat. When he died, he mysteriously left behind a $450 million pension scam on the Daily Mail that then his sons, who had nothing to do with it, had to stand trial for in the UK. They were found not guilty, by the way. Pretty crazy. They was probably stacked against them, yet they were found not guilty. Very conveniently, right before Jeffrey Epstein comes into that kind of net worth that he got surreptitiously through funneling from Leslie Wexner. Middleman, I don't know. Leslie Wexner, founder of L Brands. And so no one's ever pulled on that thread. I don't have a smoking gun that says, here's the payment process that happened where it went from here to here. But it's very convenient that they were able to say, oh yeah, this guy he actually ran a whole fraud. The fucking dude competing worldwide with Rupert Murdoch at the time is worth negative $400 million and is running a scam just to keep himself alive. I don't believe that for a second. I also, and this is where I have no proof. Now I'm really speculating. Let's be clear about that. But we've all just seen the scene in Godfather 2 when Tom Hagen, and if you haven't, sorry, you got to watch that movie, spoiler alert. But Tom Hagen goes and visits Frank Pentangeli at the prison where he was, he was going to be a witness and then decided not to be a witness in the moment against the mob. And so now he was still in prison awaiting what was going to happen to him. And Tom doesn't come up to him and say, Frank, you need to kill yourself or we're going to kill you and your whole family. They start talking about the Roman Empire and how when things went wrong, they would just open up their wrists, and it would go away. And what do you know? Frank Pentangeli kills himself before Tom Hagen shakes his hand like they have an understanding and says, all is forgiven, your family will be fine, just take care of business. And then he kills himself. I believe something like that probably happened with Robert Maxwell. He had run his course. He was a loud guy. He was a controversial guy. He was a guy that eventually his narcissism was going to outweigh his ability to be an effective spy. And I think there was probably a conversation like that happened. And I think he was too much of a raging megalomaniacal narcissist to actually kill himself. And so I think he said, fuck you, and took a trip onto, the West African islands with his yacht. Said, I'm going to get away. And then they said, well, he's not doing it, so we're going to do it to him. And then I think they funneled his money from him to Epstein. That's my theory. I'd love to see someone pull on it.
And who is they in that?
In that case, that would be some form of, I believe, Israeli intelligence.